Like, the rising and falling lava is a classic platformer archetype. I'll add it to the FE wiki for an archetype. I mean, but I was using archetype correctly there. I wasn't doing like the Fire Emblem brain rot thing. That's how you use the word. Archetype is a real word, and it has like a real use case, rather than just saying like Medea archetype. I was doing it correctly. Y'all are just Fire Emblem brain rotted. Like, a level archetype is a thing within a genre, especially within platformers. I associate it much more with Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, deck archetypes are a thing too. I don't associate it with Yu-Gi-Oh! From my time in Magic is when I think of it, but deck archetypes are a thing too. Like, it's a real word. And like, you know, there are some archetypes within Fire Emblem too. It's just the way that the fandom usually uses the word is too broad. Let's not get started with Magic the Gathering. I've fallen deep into Arena with my Chocobo deck. You hurt me with those words. Universes beyond. One of the reasons that I'm not coming back to Magic. It's not like exclusively like the universes beyond. Like, it does clash a little bit and feel like the Fortnite-ification. Like, I don't know, I'm on the sort of the having all these different worlds in Magic. On the one hand, I do like looking at like, oh, that's a cool way to like take this Fallout thing and give it Magic mechanics. But I wish that Universes Beyond like had its own format. Especially because, and this is like the real crime of Universes Beyond, is the power creep. I'm a Legacy player. Legacy was my format of choice. I had a couple of Legacy decks and a pretty big Legacy collection, so I could build some stuff too. And it's not a completely static format, but it's one that moves slowly for the most part, or did when I played it. But, because of power creep, we now have, like, just this ridiculousness that happens where just, like, every deck that I owned just doesn't work anymore. Like, my favorite deck is Green-Red Lands, because it's a control deck that uses unconditional, or, like, untraditional control elements, right? I think it's a phenomenal deck idea. I love it. And it's just not viable anymore because of all the power creep, creating like all these new pushed archetypes, and it's just sad. Ooh. Ooh, this one's gonna be tricky. Some decks go crazy on turn 3 or 4. I mean, that's slow for Legacy. That's slow for Legacy. But always has been. And I think there's a difference between, like, I'm not even necessarily saying I want, like, every game to be super long and drawn out, but I want, you know, mid-range and control to have the tools to fight against the fast combo decks and the aggressive decks and stuff like that. Like, Dazed Delver... Oh, you're an enemy. Whoops. Dazed Delver, has always, at least from the time that I've been playing, right? always been a presence in Legacy. And that's a deck that, like, if you can't do stuff early on, it just runs away with the game, right? Reanimator, which has become, like, too much now. Like, apparently, they just printed so much support for Reanimator that it is too much now. But how Reanimator used to be, was something that I could handle as a Lands player. And Lands is not, like, it's not a good matchup. Lands is not, well favored in there. Oops All Spells is the first deck that I ever played, and cause that's the current, like, controversy, is Oops All Spells. But Oops All Spells isn't Oops All Spells anymore. Because of the way that power creep has worked, it was an all-in, all or nothing, like, the skill of Oops All Spells was mulliganing, right? And now it's just a I win unless they have very specific hate deck. Because, so it used to be that there were not, spell lands, which are sort of the basis of Oops All Spells now. For anyone who's not familiar, I'm talking so much Magic the Gathering stuff that, like, if you're not familiar, this is... It's probably gonna be frustrating for you. But the way that Oops All Spells works is it takes advantage of, it builds a deck that has no lands in it. And then it uses, there's a card that mills target player. There's 2 cards. So they have 8 potential draws to get to it. The idea is that in a deck with no lands, you want to make 4 mana and then cast either Balustrade Spy or the other one whose name I can't remember. Both of which say, you know, target player puts cards from their deck into the graveyard until they put a land in. You target yourself, so you put your entire deck in the graveyard. And then you have some spells in the graveyard that you can cast that result in you winning the game. Previously, the way that it worked is there's some spells that can give you mana. So there's Lotus Petal, which is a 0 mana artifact that lets you get 1 mana. There's Elven Spirit Guide and Simian Spirit Guide, which are creatures you can exile from your hand to get mana. Because normally you make mana through lands. So if you have no lands in your deck, the ability to cast spells is super restricted. And then there's some ritual cards where you can spend 1 or 2 mana in order to create more than the amount of mana you have. Dark Ritual lets you spend 1 mana to get 3 mana. Pyretic Ritual lets you spend 2 mana to get 3 mana. So the idea behind Oops All Spells back in the day was you have all these cards that let you get mana. You also play a couple of free cyclers. What a cycler is basically you pay a cost and discard it in order to draw a new card. So Street Wraith lets you pay 2 life to discard it and draw a new card. Basically lets you, like, thin your deck and make it more likely that you get 4 mana and the creature you need to cast. The 4 mana creatures to mill yourself. There's also, I believe it was fucking, there's a vial that you can exile. It's called, like, Dream Vial or something. And it lets you get a free mulligan by exiling it at the start of the game. So the idea is you're going really, really all in to try to get the 4 mana to cast this thing, and then if it gets countered, which there are free counter spells in Legacy, so they can counter even if you go first, you just lose. And of course, if you can't do it on turn 1, you basically lose also. just because the more cards your opponent can draw, the more likely they are to have something that can counter your spell. However, as part of power creep, Wizards has printed double-sided lands, which are basically their spells that don't count as lands, but you can play them their backside as a land. And so now, instead of being this really all-in, mulligan-heavy, take risky hands and hope that, like, okay, I've got a couple of street rates I can draw into a land deck, it's just a really, really consistent count to 4. The other thing about all the mana sources that I named earlier, you know, like Simian Spirit Guide, Lotus Petal stuff, those are all temporary. Because they're spells, you can't just, like, play them and leave them on the field. You have to have them in your hand and play them out all in the same turn. The lands, they're a permanent source of mana. So because it runs like 18 lands now. The thing is called Oops All Spells, and it runs more lands than the average Legacy deck. It's such horseshit. Legacy also has loops that kill you without interaction. I mean, I think a well-tuned Legacy deck puts interaction into it so that you can interact with those loops. And the old version of Oops All Spells... folded to interaction. But now, because it has so many... Because it can actually run lands, because that's the thing, is like... The old version of Oops All Spells couldn't spend mana on anything other than its primary game plan of counting to 4. Because all of its mana was temporary. Now that its mana is permanent, like it runs the double-sided lands, it can afford to play interaction, so it can afford to, you know, fight counter wars. It can afford to fight, it can afford to, like, play removal for hate pieces. It can afford to just do a secondary game plan, which old school Oops didn't. And yet Wizards says, like, oh, it rewards deep and intricate knowledge of the game. No, it doesn't. You run 18 lands. It's a fucking travesty. I hate it. In Standard, I got caught in a heal damage per heal loop and lost yesterday. I don't know anything about current Standard. Even back when I played, I didn't play Standard, because I just don't have interest in a format that rotates that quickly, which is why I'm not getting back into Legacy, because with, you know, Masters sets and Universes Beyond sets and stuff that's printed directly into Legacy, now Legacy has a rotation. And the thing about rotation, right, is Magic decks are so expensive. Rotation is basically when, like, one pool of cards becomes illegal and the new printed cards become the new format, right? And the reason that I'm just not interested in fast rotating formats is because, as cool as it can be to, like, you know, try to solve a new format and there's tons of new toys to play with, it does mean that you sort of commit to spending hundreds of dollars a year, in a way that's just not enjoyable, or not something that I want to sign up for. Meanwhile, with Legacy decks, even though the initial cost, right, is a lot more, like on each of my Legacy decks, I've spent over $1,000. Although there's some overlap in cards where, like, the total value of my deck might be over $1,000, but because I've got like these couple $100 cards are in multiple decks, like I can move them between them depending on what I'm using. But they are like very expensive as an initial cost. The selling point was you won't have to upgrade. You won't have to, you know, spending $1,000 once or spending $2,000 once or whatever, you know, the number ends up being. Long term saves you money compared to, you know, paying $200-300 every year. But now, that's just not a thing in Legacy anymore. The cost of Magic turns me off, but I build models and stuff. I do think that, like, Magic being significantly more expensive than other card games is, like, you know, it's bad for the game, right? Okay, I don't want to use the firepower for this section because this section seems hard, but like fun. So I know all the people are gonna be like sad that I'm not taking the shimp, but okay, fine, I will take the shimp. I'll just intentionally take damage there so I don't have the firepower. Because I do want to have to do that platforming section, you know, no power up. The immunity to lava is cool, but it makes like these, what should be sort of final exam levels, inherently a lot easier. In a way that I personally do not want. Fuck. Oh, how do I get past that one, though? I just have to jump at the perfect timing. $60 Pokemon decks are viable and competitive. The thing about Pokemon is they've sort of shifted to the model where the expensive cards aren't expensive for, like, because of strength purposes, for play purposes, but they're expensive because of collectors. And I do think Magic, like, would benefit from that being a thing with their, like, sort of premium print cards. The super rare ones that are not meaningfully different, from a gameplay perspective, but are, like, sought after for creators. You know, like the One Ring, the One Ring, as opposed to the regular One Ring. But then that's, you know, a bad example because the One Ring itself became super expensive for competitive reasons. That being said, I do think that Pokemon is in a position where it's perhaps easier for it to do that. Because, like, what's the Charizard of Magic the Gathering? Charizard, at least when I was growing up, was a super expensive card that was not very good in the actual game, but was expensive because collectors wanted Charizard because it's Charizard. One of the most popular Pokemon of all times. Like, they have that bit of nostalgia to work on, or to work with, that other games don't. And, like, you know, Universes Beyond provides some amount of this, right? I gave the one of one ring example, right? But at least so far, they've also been, you know, pushed competitively. And I don't think it's necessarily viable for Wizards if they want to make the amount of money that they, you know, clearly want to make, to put all of it in collectibles, and none of the value come from play value. Even Yu-Gi-Oh!, you know, which doesn't have the same level of iconicness as Pokemon does. Blue Eyes White Dragon. Everyone knows what the Blue Eyes White Dragon is. That's Kaiba's card. Skull Servant, that's Yugi's card, right? Like, the anime propelling up specific, not good in tournament cards. I don't know if Blue Eyes White Dragon is actually expensive, so I might be making a bad point. If you know Yu-Gi-Oh, please tell me. But it is at least, like, an iconic card, right? It's a card that I feel like there will always be a market for, or whatever. God damn it. This cat is busting my balls. There's Blue Eye Structure deck, so you can get a copy pretty easily. Okay. So supply and demand makes it so that Blue Eyes can't be the Charizard of Yu-Gi-Oh! I wanted to kill the cat, but I think the cat's on fire, so I can't. I jumped! Oh my goodness. The umbrella killed me. I remember when we played Yu-Gi-Oh! Growing up, we looked it up, half the cards in our decks weren't tournament legal. I remember I played Yu-Gi-Oh! Growing up, and, like, then later, when I was a teenager, I got, like, a Game Boy, or I think it was college, actually, but whatever amount of time later, I got a Game Boy Advance game, and a ton of the cards that I had used, like super powerful stuff, like Pot of Greed and Black Hole and whatnot, were illegal for Jackie, all that stuff. And so I used a cheat code to just let me use all those cards because I was like, I want to use them though. They shouldn't be illegal. They can't be illegal because I want to use them. And so then, like, that in and of itself is already kind of silly. This cat. I hate this cat. Oh god. Okay. This is a whole other shebang. But then I would be like, ha, that idiot computer is using the weaker version instead of Harpy's Feather Duster. Why don't they just use Harpy's Feather Duster? And it's like, well, because the card's illegal, Dani, you idiot. Why did they use the weaker version of Rejeki? The more balanced version that got printed? Gee, I wonder. Okay, got you. Oh no! I wanted to kill the cat and then I just... Yeah, okay. Damn, that segment looks like it's gonna be hard. Forbidden card stonk. At least it wasn't super poly. I don't even know what that means. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has so many things that I just don't know what they means. How are these illegal? It was in the anime. I like how the Yu-Gi-Oh! Anime just completely made up the rules. And I recently learned that that's because it wasn't actually initially supposed to be an anime about the card game. And it was initially like a kind of Jigsaw, but for a bunch of different children's games. Situation? Holy shit, we beat it. And so the card game was just popular, and they had to, like, scramble to come up with the rules after it became popular, and they decided they were gonna make it in real life. Because it was just, like, a popular episode in the anime.